Okay, this is AP Dual Credit Psychology, Unit 1, Lecture 5. Doing all these back to back, sometimes I'm losing it. So this should be vocab number 2. If you're in AP Dual Credit Psychology, this would be vocab number 2, and it should be the second part of it. Yesterday, depending on how often you watch this, is earlier today for me. We've already covered structuralism, functionalism, and the evolutionary perspective. Remember, structuralism is the idea that it's how someone is built, basically through introspection. Functionalism is, okay, we take someone and how they're built and we sort of put them in different environments, see how they adapt to these particular environments. And then we have the evolutionary perspective, which says, you're born the way you are. And depending on that DNA that was passed on to you, that's pretty much going to determine who you are in spite of your environment. So that's the evolutionary perspective. Again, most psychologists think most things are 50-50. Half of what you're made up of and half is experience, with the exception of intelligence. Evolutionary perspective is that's what I just talked about. Gestalt psychology is the idea that we look at things as a whole. We don't look at it as individual parts because we take in 2 billion bits of information every second. And to look at every little pixel of our life would be very difficult. It's easier to put them in together into groups that make sense. Then we also talked about the psychoanalytic. I hope that didn't scare you off. Sigmund Freud, free association, dream analysis, case studies primarily about sex. And that was a driving force behind everything between the id, the ego, and the superego. Talked about intelligence testing, which was this, now that we've become more industrialized and people are moving towards the cities, we got to put kids in school and make sure they're in the right grade. Now, again, it's a predictor of how you'll do, but it's not necessarily the cause of why you will do what you do with that. So that catches us up through yesterday. And earlier, we just talked about evolutionary perspective. And again, the evolutionary perspective is that it's all in the family. It's all in DNA and everything else. Well, the extreme opposite side of the evolutionary perspective is the behavioral perspective. The behavioral perspective basically argues that you are born a blank slate, and that if I was an esteemed psychologist, I could go to an orphanage and I could pick out any child, regardless of who their parents are, and I could make them the next great doctor, the next great lawyer, the next great criminal, whatever, all based on a series of how I raise them, rewards, punishments, and things as such. They also believe that every thing that we do, it's observable. Whereas psychoanalysis says there's that battle inside of us and nobody can see it. It's like, no, you picked up the cookie because you were hungry. There's no little secret battle going on in you. You're hungry, you picked up cookie, reward of food and energy that comes with it. So this is the behavioral perspective. Pavlov, Watson, Skinner, the big 3 names that sort of go along with it. And it's 2 types of conditioning. One is called classical conditioning, and classical conditioning is we change the stimulus, but our behavior stays the same. It's natural behaviors, but what happens is the natural behavior changes to something else. For example, being scared. We know how to be scared. Naturally, the only thing we're scared of is a loud noise and heights as soon as we get depth perception. But that's the only thing we're naturally scared of. So in order for me to be scared of a snake or a dog or anything else, I'm going to have to learn that at some point. And if I could learn that, I could certainly unlearn it. Whereas operant conditioning is learning a new behavior, learning how to write with a pen, learning how to make a paper airplane. You make it successfully, you throw it, it flies. That's through operant conditioning, a series of rewards and punishments there. And again, we're going to go into a lot of detail on this down the road, but just to give you a general idea, Pavlov was known for research on classical conditioning, where he did a study he started with dogs. What he was trying to discover was, do dogs, are their digestive systems, are they similar to humans? So if I want to study the human digestive system, as we talked about before, if I want to study the human digestive system, I want to look at a dog because a dog is simpler, and if a dog gets sick and dies, it's a dog. And again, I don't want to sound inhumane, but that was the belief behind it. So it's similar to the human digestive system. So let's look at the dog digestive system and go from there. And so he needed to measure the salivation that came out of a dog. And then what he soon discovered was every time he brought the dogs into the lab to feed them, they would start to salivate automatically being in the lab. Well, there's nothing nutritious or tasty about the lab, but they connected it with the idea of getting food. And that's the idea behind classical conditioning. John Watson, who's the father of behaviorism, again, we're going to talk about him more down the road as well. He believed that he could take any child from any situation at a very young age, and they were a blank slate, and you could make them whatever. He did what was a very controversial experiment about 1920 with little baby Albert. And again, babies, nothing they're afraid of except a loud noise, which is why we tend to pair the word no with the sound of no. It's very loud. So he decided, can I make a child? Can I change their particular conditioning by using what they're already naturally afraid of? So he had a little baby play with a white rat, and we'll get into more details on this down the road. And the baby wasn't afraid of a white rat because the baby doesn't know about rabies or anything like that. Then what they did was every time the baby touched the white rat, they would take a steel bar and a hammer and go bam as loud as they could. And then eventually that fear of the steel bar and the hammer he associated with the little white rat. So every time he saw the little white rat, even without the loud noise, he became scared of it. Okay, all classical conditioning. I already know how to be afraid. I already know how to salivate. My heart already knows how to beat faster. I already know how to sweat. It's just some other stimulus is going to start to cause it. Now, the other side of that behaviorism coin is something called operant conditioning. And operant conditioning is where you change the way that you operate. And again, through a series of rewards and punishments is how this occurs. I want this little guy here to peck this particular circle. So if he, just stands there, I don't give him a reward. He starts to peck around here. I give him somewhat of a reward, but not a big reward. And as he gets closer and closer, I give him more and more of a reward, and I shape him. And finally, boom, gets the reward. I've now conditioned him to peck that little circle. All right, and it's all based on this idea of rewards. It's how gambling works and all these other things. If you want to look at the behaviorist approach in more detail, there's a little bit of a reading if you want to sort of look ahead, but this is something we'll get to later on in the semester, as we will with all of this material. That was early to mid-1900s, and then by the time we get to the 1970s, there tends to be this sort of new wave coming in, where it's not all predetermined, it's not just rewards and punishments, that there is something within us, but ultimately we want to be the best us we can be, the best human that we can be. This came around in like the 60s and 70s as people were trying to discover themselves, being the best me I can be. One of the best-selling books of the decade was a book entitled I'm Okay, You're Okay. And it was just about personal growth and reaching your potential, and your potential may not be my potential. So it doesn't mean that we're all going to go on this journey or a similar journey. Your journey is different from mine. Some people are going to be doctors. I'm not going to be a doctor. Some people are going to be, I'm not going to be a lawyer. Some people are going to be ditch diggers and be great ditch diggers and raise a family as a laborer, whatever. Great. But we all have our own journey, and the idea is on this journey, can I be the best me I can be? I'm not going to marry the most amazing woman, though I did. But most of us, can I marry the most amazing woman that I can attract? The best that I can do? Am I getting the most out of my potential? Is this life the best it can be? That's the humanistic perspective. This was put together by a gentleman by the name of Carl Rogers. I remember him as Mr. Rogers, if you're familiar with Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And a lot of it was based on just talking. Whereas psychoanalysis is you talk to me and I analyze you and I tell you what you are. Humanistic theory was you talk to me and I go, that's interesting. What do you think it means? And I am just the tour guide on you finding the solution for you. Family therapy, couple therapy. You got a couple people come together. Come here, Scott, I love you. You got the Dr. Evil guy. And sometimes you need a third observer to just sort of take it along, marriage counseling, anything like that. where ultimately you want the family, you want the couple, you want the person to find the solution on their own. It's the feed a man a fish, eats for a day, teach a man to fish, eats for the rest of his life sort of belief. And what you got to also have is unconditional positive regard. No matter how bad the person comes in, you got to find something positive about it. If somebody comes in and goes, I beat my children, I've beaten my wife, I steal from work, I've lost 3 jobs, I'm an alcoholic, and I've had 18 DUIs. And you go, whoa, that's a big bowl of hardship, and you got to find something positive about that. So you go, well, you came in for help. That's step 1, and then you go through all those various, a lot of your 12-step programs, everything else, humanistic psychology. Maslow, and again, we'll talk about him when we get to motivation, basically said that, you're no good for anybody else unless you're okay for yourself. Again, I got to take care of me as human. So his belief is you got to take care of your basic needs, your physiological needs. I got to breathe, I got to eat, I got to go to the bathroom. I got to do these things because if someone's driving, I can't breathe. I don't care whether or not Susie likes me or not. I can't breathe. I got to take care of my basic physiological needs, and I got to take care of my safety needs. I like to not be punched in the face. And then once I have that, then I can move up to love and belonging and esteem and eventually self-actualization, where I can be more comfortable with me. Once, I accept me and take care of me and love others, then others will love me and I will get up to that level, hopefully. And again, we'll talk about that in a little bit when we get to motivation. So there's a little bit on humanism if you just want to sort of read that and see what we're talking about with that self-actualization and everything else. But again, all this stuff is what we'll get to later. It's kind of an intro here. Then after the humanistic perspective sort of runs its course in the 60s and 70s, along comes something called the cognitive philosophy of psychology. The cognitive philosophy is rooted in the ideas of changing the way you think, because a lot of times the way we think impacts who we are and how we are and all those other things. So, and it affects our attitude. If you think that something is scary, it's scary. If you don't think it's scary, it's not scary. If you think everything's going to be bad, it's more likely to be bad. But if you think it's going to be well, it's going to be well. And so the way we think is key. And what's also important is to realize that over time we think differently. The egocentrism of a 5-year-old, where they see the world through their eyes and they think everybody else sees it that way, is different than the egocentrism of a 15-year-old who sees the world through their eyes and realizes other people don't see it that way, but they're dumb and they should. So this sort of evolves over time, and the way we think impacts sort of everything. Piaget, who we'll talk about when we get to childhood development, we'll mention these 4 different stages. And as we start to evolve, we start to realize, things that you can pull a trick on a little kid, like, I only have 2 pieces of candy and you got 4 pieces. It's not fair. And you take their 2 pieces and break. It's 4 and 4 now. Okay. And that's fair. You can't do that to a 14-year-old. You can't play peekaboo with a 5-year-old, but you can play with a 5-month-old. So what happens is over time, our mind starts to evolve and develop. We're not just little mini adults right out of the womb. So we'll talk about that. Again, we change the way that we think. Ellis talked about this being sort of the key to everything we are, is because the way I think controls the way I feel and my emotions and everything else. And my emotions also control the way I think. So a lot of phobias, it's based on changing the way you think. Again, are you afraid of being on a plane? Why? Well, because they crashed. Well, how often does that happen? And you look at the odds and everything else and whatnot. It's the reason why, currently this is August of 2020 and we're in the whole coronavirus, do we go back to school thing? And some people have an attitude about, I don't want to wear a mask. I think it's my right and everything else. And then there's other people who, you wear a mask because the odds of you may not get it, but, you just want to hedge your bets. And then there's people that are just paranoid. I can't leave the house because I'll get it. So that's going to affect all your actions. It's your attitude before you go out. So a lot of times, in order to change people's behavior, we got to change their attitude, and changing the way they think and their outlook on life and everything else. And this can also be impacted, as we'll talk about down the road, with language. And Chomsky here talks about language, and he talks about the idea and belief that we're influenced by others that are around us. Humans have an innate ability for grammar and understanding language. We have a broken or Wernicke area on our left side that enables us to do that as long as we use it. But then we're also influenced by those around us. Do we have an accent? Do we use proper grammar? The words you use versus the words that I use, your teen slang, whatnot. The fact that you communicate through the phone more than I do, which again is an innate form of language. So all of this is sort of new with that. And again, if you want to jump ahead on cognitive psychology and read a little bit more about it before we get there in a later unit, there's some information right there for you as well. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about biological, neurological. This happens after the 80s as we get to more modern medicine, and we can do CAT scans and PET scans, and we can take little electrodes, and we can see we can get down to a specific neuron and see it communicate throughout the brain. So this is where all these philosophies and ideas about psychology meet modern science. And we can go, okay, this one's true because we can see it happening, but this one maybe not because we can't see it happening. And you sort of start to get that combination going a lot more. So again, the focus is on the biological and genetic process in people, the DNA that you get, but not just that, but how does your brain light up compared to someone else? The fact that when I'm listening to someone, my temporal lobes light up, but when I see something, my occipital lobes light up, but when I see something that's logical, it's the left side of my occipital lobe, which is also in connection with my right eye. All these sorts of things that we can see and we can understand start to make sense. And it also realizes that some people are having problems, not because of the way they think, they're just wired a little bit differently. You don't get enough of a natural, your body's not producing enough dopamine, so you're more likely to be depressed because you're not getting that excitement. Or you have somebody that produces too much dopamine, and as a result, I see things, I have illusions and delusions, and I hear voices that other people are hearing. I'm schizophrenic, so I need to bring that down a little bit. So this is sort of this combination of the philosophy of psychology with more the science of psychology. And you got to want to do a little combo plate there. Again, a little bit more information on the biological. And we'll get into that in a little bit more detail actually in the next unit. Finally, the last one that I want to cover here is what's called sociocultural. And this is very, very recent. And boy, are we seeing it. And again, this is August of 2020. We're seeing it with systematic racism is nothing new in this country, but suddenly we're paying attention to it because of others and because of marching and whatever. Science and the distrust of science, that's kind of a new thing. Well, why do we have that? The sociocultural is where we're getting all of our information. The fact that I have a phone, but I only look at the people that agree with me, so I become more polarized by looking at, we're a more polarized nation than we are, and this has a lot to do with it. We're a more depressed nation than ever before. Your generation is very interesting because you're one of the most connected generations of all time, but you're also one of the loneliest generations of all time. You can see where you can't, you're not feeling somebody else, you're not holding them. That's kind of being removed from you. So that, how we see others behave, and then that becomes appropriate behavior. When we see other people be aggressive and be rewarded for it, we become more aggressive. So this is what's referred to as sociocultural psychology, where you take a look at this real quick here, the individual, who you are, and then the microsystem, who you surround yourselves with, the ecosystem around where you live, and all these other things that go along. And then as it happens over time, it sort of piles up and builds who you are. I mentioned, excuse me, I mentioned your smartphone earlier. In 2007, the iPhone was introduced, and by 2012, 50% of teenagers have an iPhone by 2012. This is the release of the internet down here. The internet released in the 90s. So people are on little chat rooms and whatever, and you're not feeling lonely because you're seeing other people's suicide rates are going down because you can talk to others, you can get information. Then suddenly the iPhone is released and we go, wow, this is pretty great. But then we're living through the iPhone. And then when you get right here to 2012, when it comes to I often feel left out, I often feel lonely, teens are taking off there because you're talking to people, but then what you're also doing is you're allowing yourself to be judged by others because you're constantly putting out these statuses and does somebody else like my status? Does somebody else like my picture? So you're constantly allowing others to judge you. And then you're seeing what other people are doing and why aren't I doing that? And it's always keeping score. It's always keeping score. And that's a new phenomenon. So we can do a study like that and see how the smartphone has an impact. We can look at the reason why, the United States maybe is at this time struggling a little bit more with COVID because we're a very individualistic culture. It's my right. I get to do what I want. No one's going to tell me to do what I want. Versus a collectivist culture can get it under control pretty quickly because they're all sort of in it together. And even within the United States, we've got a division of some people that are very individualistic people and some people that are very much more collective. And that's the clash that's going on right now. Love the clash. Train in vain. Last thing we need to talk about here, a psychologist versus, excuse me, a psychiatrist. What is the difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist? And a sideshow. Probably make one up. Psychologist is basically a person who's professionally trained in research, practice, teaching, or all three of one or more branches of psychology. They should have a master's or a doctoral degree. You can work in various settings, including schools, you can be high school, university, you can be a counselor, you can have a private practice, you can be a teacher. I guess technically I am a psychologist because I have a master's degree in psychology and I instruct it. But this falls under that particular thing. Now, a psychiatrist is different. A psychiatrist is different, first off, because they have more education. They're a medical doctor, MD, psychiatrist, MD. And not only can they do everything that a psychologist does, a counselor, and all these other things, and studying these disorders, whether it's in a lab or outside of a lab, whatever, but they're also a medical doctor, so they can prescribe medication. If you go to a psychologist may suggest, yeah, you may need this or that, go see your family doctor. But if you go to a psychiatrist, they'll go, yeah, you need this, let me get on my pad and write you a little thing, you have a target and grab it. So that's the big difference. Is a psychiatrist tends to have more training, and also on top of that, they can prescribe medication because they are a medical doctor. And that, a little bit more there on health and therapy, if you want to take a look at it, a little bit more there on the different schools of thought of psychology. And if you got a degree in psychology, things that you could do with it. So that wraps up the first unit. If you have any questions on this PowerPoint, other PowerPoints, what's going to be on the test, anything like that, please feel free to reach out to me. You can do it in class, of course. You can do it online through Schoology. You can do it through email or anything like that. So that should wrap us up, and that wraps up your first unit. So good luck.